On behalf of RCR Wireless News, I'm Kelly Hill, the executive editor, and I'm about to introduce you to a whole list of distinguished speakers here tonight who are going to give us some great insights on 5G and various perspectives across the ecosystem. Just for your information, we are videotaping this, so be aware of the cameras, and just know if you heckle us, you're in trouble. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and Lindsay, why don't you go ahead and introduce your perspective? This is Lindsay Notwell, SVP of 5G Strategy at Cradlepoint.
Thanks, Kelly. Lindsay Notwell.
Yes, thank you.
And I look after our 5G strategy as well as our global operator relationships. Been with the company for about 6 years. I was actually with Verizon for 17 years before that, and was responsible for their strategy planning and implementation of their LTE network. So the interesting perspective that I've got, which I think is a lot of fun, is seeing here it is, just a scant 8 years later, and we're already talking about 5G, and it's amazing how fast it's coming. So we're excited to be here.
Okay, great. Caroline.
So I'm Caroline Chen. I'm with Intel. I manage the 5G infrastructure business at Intel. My interest and focus is really driving 5G infrastructure through NFV, SDN, of course, but mainly focusing on the ROI of 5G. How does 5G use cases get benefited the enterprise? That's my personal interest, is the enterprise edge. And we've been doing a lot of edge compute. How does that benefit across the spectrum? We all know that 5G, the way that we talked about, is going to take a lot of investment. Where are we going to get the return of investment? No money, nobody's going to go invest, right? So we just came off Winter Olympics, where Intel is a worldwide sponsor. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next 2 days. But I would really like to take this opportunity to explore and discuss and debate with folks how does edge in enterprise side that we as the telco folks can play a role.
Okay, great. Alon.
Alon Segal, CTO for Telit Wireless. Telit's a little different animal than some of the folks around here. We do IoT. So we help companies like Cradlepoint and others by delivering devices built on Intel technology and others.
Thank you very much.
To connect to the network. So I think the perspective we have is all the folks making these wonderful IoT devices, whether they're high-end edge, taking advantage of the speeds of 5G or the promise of what will come, as well as folks doing things on the other side of the spectrum. And all these use cases need to come together in the world of 5G. And how do we all create the opportunities, the applications, the uses that will drive this technology forward?
Okay, Roger.
Roger Billings, Global Solutions Architect. I'm actually here representing a partner of ours that is a customer. His flight was canceled, but my job at Cradlepoint is to talk about the 5G strategy from a technical aspect. So I'm sort of the technical side of Lindsay when it comes to a team there. But I'll be talking about what enterprises are doing and what the drivers are from an enterprise to say why 5G is important for them.
Okay, and Hasib.
Yeah, hi, Hasib Akhtar. I work for the Ericsson's AT&T customer unit, currently working as a chief architect. So my interest is looking at the impact of the applications in terms of the RAN and the core network, how they're going to be distributed, deployed, and what are the roles they're going to play. And also, from the cloud platform and automation and orchestration perspective, how are we going to bring all of those components to bring to bear so that the 5G becomes more realizable?
Okay, great. We do have one absence, and that is AT&T. Unfortunately, they weren't able to make it at the last minute. Do we have any carriers in the house? Any carriers? Carrier representatives? Anybody who wants to join us up here? We promise not to bite. All right, okay. So on that note, all right, panelists, let's go ahead and start out with what are you hearing from partners or end users about that makes you think that 5G will be successful? And Lindsay, I'm going to start with you because you look like you have something in mind already.
Sure. So little bit about Cradlepoint. We've been in business now for about 12 years, and we were the first 4G LTE networking solution in the world, and are the largest in terms of market share. And what we found is that when 4G came out, there was this massive adoption of it because wireless became faster than a wire. And what enterprises want more than anything is flexibility, is freedom of time and place. That LTE gave them that because they don't have to wait for the wire to get installed, and it allows them the flexibility of where they want to place it, and doing things in places like vehicles or ships, things like that. And so what we're talking to customers about are the many use cases that they have today, and they're countless. But what we're seeing is that they want more. You know, just like consumers have this ever insatiable demand for, you know, more, better, faster video, 4K, 8K, et cetera. But we're seeing the same thing from enterprises, is that they want the ability to do anything they want to do, wherever and whenever they want it to do that. And so we're seeing excitement like we haven't seen before from enterprises. It's been really remarkable.
Okay. Other folks who are hearing from partners about what they're interested in that makes you think 5G will be adopted and be a success?
Well, I'll chime in. So when I looked at 4G, that's when the NAV SDN started. And there's still a lot of learnings that we went through. Some of the things we probably could have done faster and sooner from the very beginning, like orchestration, like a solution that not a bag of parts, but a whole solution together. In 5G, what I'm really encouraging, I'm involved a lot with what used to be called 4G Americas, now 5G Americas. You know, most of the operators in Americas are on the board. Day one, when we changed our name of 5G Americas, I remember the conversation was 5G must start with NAV SDN as a foundation. The trick is, if you want to get more money, more than just a SIM card, you have to have enterprise, to exactly what you said. When we go talk to enterprise, which is Intel's bread and butter, so my division is part of the data center division, you go talk to CIO, they're not the network operators. They're much more comfortable with something that looks like a server, feels like a server, runs like a server. Just if that as a starting point of the conversation, all of a sudden you have this varieties of use cases. I'm personally involved in 5G AA, AECC, Automotive Edge Compute Association. We just started a 5G industry automation in Germany. Yep. We're doing MEC. We did connected cars. The ability to take a network slicing, which we haven't even got to that point, and to be able to run and give exact same square of SLAs and bandwidth and frequency to the enterprise. Don't even forget CBRS. All the things that started coming about. The enterprise got very excited. I'm spending more time now talking with folks I would never have talked to as a telco person. It really tells me is that 5G has legs, but there's more ways to get paid. Okay. Everything's going back to how do you get paid? Where's the money going to come from?
Absolutely. Okay. So then I want to follow up on something both of you have mentioned, and that's use cases. So how do you define a 5G use case? What makes a 5G use case different from a 4G use case? You know, what 5G use cases do you see driving demand and/or investment?
So let me take that.
Thank you.
So I think technically it's very clear that you have a you know, what we call is that, you know, ultra reliable, low latency communications, URLLC type of communication that's enabled by 5G. So which is basically, you know, you have a higher bandwidth, and you have much, you know, smaller latency to your edge, which is in the range of, you know, 3 to 5 milliseconds, right? Okay. So with this capability, you know, there are a lot of use cases that have been described, although jury is still out on what is the killer apps, right? But I think from a technology perspective, I think it happens that once you have the investment go forward and there are capabilities that you hand out to the, to the different business innovators, people will come up with the use cases to actually make sure that that is brought to bear. But there are several things that I think that we are seeing from our partners. A lot of the things that Caroline mentioned, but one of the things that we see is that in a lot of the manufacturing enterprises have cables that are connected to their different type of devices, and they want to cut those cables. And the key capabilities that they need is the latency as well as the bandwidth and the precision and the accuracy, right? All of those are available that 5G can have. Automotive is also another thing, right? It's a sheer amount of data that you have in the form of IoT. And then also, there are other things that are on the innovation side that are coming up, is that because you have so much capability to process data at the edge, you can do a lot of analytics and a lot of data crunching in terms of machine learning or artificial intelligence, that you don't have to do it by taking those data to your core network into the data center, right? So those are some of the things that enables 5G related use cases that are far, far different from the 4G capabilities.
Any other 4G versus 5G perspectives? Alon?
I would
Roger?
say the pathway to 4G or the pathway to 5G is a very critical part of all this, because the speeds of 4G are getting to the point where it's going to be hard to tell the difference. The latency is obviously a big differential between the two. Okay. I think the applications for the enterprise, what they're looking at, they haven't been defined yet. There are things that we can't do today that other departments, outside of IT, are having struggles with. They may need to do video teleconferencing or something like that, which it works under 4G, but being able to have that wirelessly, or like you said, the automotive or the manufacturing plants, that's another interesting use case of taking all of those wires and losing them. Obviously, augmented reality is another thing, but that's not really playing a lot in the enterprise except for some very special use cases. We're seeing a little bit more with, let's say, like a smart kiosk, where instead of having a device behind the screen, you have a person on the other end using high-def teleconferencing. Okay. So the remote subject matter expert is another sort of a unique possibility that you can get with 5G and the pathway to 4G, so adding the 4G into that.
The Uberization of expertise.
There you go. Thank you.
Right. Alon, you looked like you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I think we tend to confuse the audience sometimes. We're technologists here, and we like to speak and throw out acronyms about ultra-low latencies and a variety of other things that 5G will deliver. But ultimately, to make this simple, we're talking about more bandwidth, more capacity, and hopefully at a lower cost. And that need for more of everything is really what's driving this forward. We have some of that in the 4G applications that are driving our business today. We do great business in gigabit Ethernet today. And this is the forerunner that enables and will create the path for more and more 5G applications. Definitely lowering the latency will enable remote operations, hazardous operations. We were just talking earlier, can imagine the scenario in Hawaii and sending remotely operated drones in real time to capture what you need instead of sending humans into that environment. So the path to utilize that is starting now. Unfortunately, the technology today is limited in its inefficiencies and in its requirements of specialized applications that hopefully 5G will bring us to a much more smoother path of adoption. And we can start that path today, and that's what we're doing already in some of these environments.
Yeah, I agree with you, because we actually started doing a lot of the edge compute today with LTE. I was just gonna, Hasib mentioned about factory automation. There's a little factoid, very interesting. So China and the government announced a planned economy, 2025. Alibaba actually mentioned in one of the presentations that I've seen, public information, there are 1 million state-owned enterprise ready to be automated. That is sheer high number that we need to take advantage of. Just like back you say, these are sewing factories and outdoor metal shops. They're not connected. You can either wire fibers and Ethernet or just putting some wireless AP, starting with 4G, going to 5G. But the key point is you got to give them the compute capability. It's not connectivity for connectivity's sake. It's connectivity to perform a certain task. And that task, most of the time, requires some kinds of a compute behind it. So when we looked at, so that's one aspect. And we are recently have a proof of concept on cloud gaming. Like, huh? A lot of people play games. Today, it's all wired. We just had an extreme game in Australia that if you put that closer to the arena, imagine the experience of it, right? Most of our kids, despite our best effort, play games. They are spending tuition money playing games. So therefore, we looked at this market. It's a lot of potentials. With this capability of NFV, SDN, and edge compute, even at 4G and even more so with 5G, you're going to open up a whole lot of addressable market that today you don't address. So that's why I'm very, very bullish about what we can do together on edge compute and with the onset of 5G.
Okay. All right. So I want to follow up on that then, and that is this expansion of computing power. In order to enable the amount of processing that we're going to need, what are the implications there for network architectures? Mobile edge computing, all the way from the tower to the core. And then on top of that, you're also accounting for things like SDN and NFV and flexibility of compute resources. So, what do you see? How do you see that impacting networks? Lindsay?
Sure. So the whole point to 5G, and to me it is, latency is the killer feature. Maybe not the app necessarily, but to me it's the real hero. Everybody likes to talk about increased bandwidth, and that's great. But to me, the things that make it interesting are the new applications that will be enabled through lower latency. And to your point about software and edge computing and SDN NFV, they're all keys to making that happen. Because if you have to backhaul the traffic to a centralized core, that's just not going to work. It introduces too much latency. And Caroline, you said something about gaming for children, but actually I was reading just the other day about gaming for adults in healthcare. There are actual games that are meant to be guided by a healthcare professional to help people with adult health needs. And so it helps you with your stress training and things like that. And what happens is with this haptics are such that to have a proper healthcare experience, you need the ability to touch. So imagine the ability for a remote healthcare cart. But if a doctor can't feel something, that won't work. And so the whole haptics and I've heard reference to the tactical internet, the taptics. And so the ability to do that is going to require that same kind of low latency type of thing. I think healthcare is another huge opportunity for 5G to deliver.
Hazeeb, do you want to speak to impacts to networks?
Yeah, the network architecture, the way we expect 5G to influence is that one of the things that you all mentioned about SDN and NFV, what that's doing is basically, it's creating a lot of software application and virtualized software applications, that would be now placed at the edge as opposed to they were in the data center, right? So that creates some of the challenges, both from the operation and management aspect, and as well as from executing those applications, right? So, if you look into, data center, which, Carolyn is very fond of selling, once you move them to the central offices, from 200 or 500 or 1,000 cabinets, they become, somewhere in the tens or even, singular digits. And as you move towards the cell tower, then that becomes even more reduced footprint, right? So you have to kind of work with that, both from a hardware perspective, from a chipset perspective, as well as executing some of those network functions. And then the question of reliability comes into the picture, the high availability, and also if you are to provide the SLA in terms of the delay that you are promising the customer, then you have to manage them in a very, I guess, in a fashion that does not, compromise with the quality. So to do that, you have to, again, have very highly automated function, both in the management and the orchestration. So those are some of the areas that we're spending our times in terms of finding solutions as a community.
Okay. Roger, you're a solutions architect, so
Yeah,
I'm going to pick on you.
The MEC really excites me because the ability to have an application follow a user around is really going to be able to be played out with 5G because you need that low latency. So when I'm driving down the freeway, I can still get that low latency app because it's following me on going out to the RAN or the cell towers. And when I'm back in my fixed office, it's going to be somewhere near me. The orchestration, that's going to be critical. I mean, that's a piece that I don't think we've solved yet as an industry as to how we're going to orchestrate a network slice that moves around the network and follows the individual user running that application. So I can see it's really something that our enterprises are going to be able to look at their service providers in not just to provide connectivity. They're going to be providing network slices. They're going to be providing compute power. They're going to be providing a lot of other things because they want to move that application closest to the users that are using them.
Okay. Alon, thoughts on implications for IoT, maybe?
Again, this is, we're talking two parallel things here. I think our panelists addressed this both from the ability to move applications to the edge and also to have the connectivity follow. When you marry the two together, then all kinds of interesting things happen. We're familiar with the evolution of the technology on the cloud scenario. So containers and Dockers are technologies that push the enterprise scenario. Now imagine having that and being able to push the edge to it because you'll guarantee the connectivity and the latency to provide that wherever you need that service to happen. Of course, we as an industry need to solve lots of different pieces to make things like that happen, but that's the crux of the applications that are being defined. Again, from an IoT perspective, you don't always want all that data flowing upwards. And so the compute power on the edge, the types of gateways that concentrate that, be it video, be it variety of different massive input ingestion and so on, but also the pushback. Once the algorithms for the predictive maintenance or whatever it is you want to do, you want to push that back down towards the edge. So the marrying of these two technologies together, if we do indeed overcome all the different pieces, opens up a huge variety of applications. And we see some elements of that beginning to come together now. It's exciting times.
Okay. So my next question is about spectrum. There is a lot of different spectrum under discussion for 5G. You have T-Mobile talking about 600 megahertz. You have a lot of folks globally talking about 3.5, which obviously is related to CBRS here in the US. And then you have obviously millimeter wave. So when you're thinking about, and Alon, I'm going to pick on you because you guys are module makers. You have an enormous spectrum range. What are the implications there for devices? I mean, for network design, those are totally different networks if you're talking about 600 megahertz versus millimeter wave.
Kelly, can I just throw a monkey in the same? What about unlicensed?
And there's that too. That too.
It's a fair question.
So Alon, and then I'll come to you, Caroline.
So complexity is good. Okay, complexity is good. It pays our salaries here. Okay, when we confuse the customer base. And we need to help them overcome this complexity. There's roles that companies like Telit can fulfill and help along the way. Now, not to be less facetious on this, it comes back to the applications. Okay. When we talk millimeter wave, we're talking fixed mobile. We're not talking mobility and self-driving cars, which are also factors in this place. So the use of the spectrum dictates the applications on it. And the deployments we'll see across the US, especially in the early days, are very much targeted towards fixed. But the mobile side of this is happening as well in the spectrum domains you mentioned, be it CBRS, be it 600 megahertz and beyond. And the press is rife with rumors on what will happen with Sprint and beyond. Makes it interesting for all of us. The demand is on both sides. The enterprise, the extension of fiber to the home type applications for high-speed 5G fixed mobile is a valid application. We'll see more and more of it. I think the enterprise is a huge driver for it. What's happening in self-driving cars will drive the need for mobility. It's already there in Europe and other places trialing on it, and we'll see the spectrum more and more. You see some of the early auctions for 3.5 happening already in applications in that domain. So again, the applications will define what ultimately is the hardware and the solution for it. And again, the barrier for complexity to support this brings a whole set of features we need to talk about. Antennas, placement, what actually goes in the box. How do you coexist with high, we talk about computing power at the edge. How do you put a high-speed processor in there, be it an x86 derivative or another?
Oh, yes, we can.
Along with the, 30, 40 gigahertz spectrum as well together in one box. So there are lots of interesting application topics. And again, this is good because it moves the industry forward and definitely creates some opportunities. It also, I think, separates some of the contenders who are playing a game on low-end price and solutions versus truly quality solutions that you need in this space.
Caroline, your thoughts on the spectrum question?
I have more questions than answers. But when we spend a lot of time talking to enterprise, the question of unlicensed spectrum inevitably comes up, especially with companies has a multinational presence. Right? What they, in a way, they feel like they have more control if it's unlicensed spectrum. I'm not saying I have the answer. In fact, I'm here hoping to hear from others, especially module makers, that costs a lot more money. But we heard that. And that is a question definitely bubble up, is that why couldn't I do the CBRS in the US, but outside the US, in Europe? There's a lot of questions about that. We are actively working on Telegraph project. That's in the millimeter waveform, but they are 5 gigahertz and so on. So these are all questions that if you go down to the enterprise level, the CIOs will say, well, could I control, what does the operator do for me? So these are all collectively us, the ecosystem needs to address. We obviously brought forward some very necessary reliability is something that the telco definitely bring forward. But you got to answer the question of liability. I was in a couple of weeks ago in a 5G Brooklyn Summit when Bosch came up and talked about their drive to achieve Industry 4.0. And somebody did ask in the operator side, what's the role of operator playing in this? Yeah. He said, well, ultimately, it's their liability, right? Something happens, they're liable. They're the factory owners. Oh. So we need to think through that. Now, I'm not saying I have the answer, but this group, through edge compute, through network slicing, security, all of that things, we must think about how do we give that power to the enterprise owners, because they are signing the check. They're buying stuff from us. So it's more of a challenge for the team.
Okay. Lindsay?
I think the spectrum thing is, I'd agree with both. But when we first launched our first 4G LTE device, it was not only single spectrum focused, it was band 13 Verizon, and then we came along with AT&T, and that was a separate SKU. Well, if we fast forward to today, we're covering the world with 2 SKUs, including all of the frequencies pretty much everywhere. Setting aside millimeter wave, I'll come back to that in a second. But I expect within a year, we'll see 1 SKU that covers pretty much everything from 600 to, call it, sub-6. And I think what you'll then see, and I think Alon said it, millimeter wave for the foreseeable future is going to be a fixed wireless kind of a scenario. So what I think you'll see in the next couple of years is either purpose-built for fixed and then everything sub-6 for mobile. Eventually, you may see that blend, but the antenna arrays are different for millimeter wave.
Yeah.
And so what I think you'll see is for those things that are somewhat mobile, is that you may see this dual kind of a modem type of thing where one side of it's focused above 6 and the rest of it's below. But the whole below thing is really sort of old news at this point, and it's just a function of the application. I think we said that earlier. So it really just depends what people are trying to accomplish.
I agree.
Hasib, any thoughts on the network and the implications of spectrum?
I think like it's always a challenge, like what Alon said, that to be able to accommodate so much of a wider range of frequency. But what I would give is that, as we progress, the challenge would be in innovating ways to accommodate those, so that you have a device that can support multi-bands, or from an infrastructure vendors that those who can churn out more, radio, infrastructure components that could support different arrays of frequencies to different things, they would have the better opportunity to win the race, and also accommodate in some of the unlicensed band, because that's where some of the pressure and competition is also coming, and I suspect that some innovations will come in that area as well.
Yeah, and I think Ericsson has, private LTE is probably something that is a good focus when you talk about the manufacturing plant. That may not be on a carrier, that may be a private LTE in your unlicensed spectrum.
Yeah.
But, we have to worry about what happens to that unlicensed spectrum if we start taking up the 5 gigahertz range, and now our Wi-Fi is no longer a valid use there. So it's a double-edged sword. But I think that another point to make is definitely have to look at the antenna design, because having something, at least from our point of view, we have an antenna that goes from 600 all the way up to 3.5, one single antenna. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it works in all those different bands. And so that's the difference between somebody that does an enterprise-grade type device that can go multi-carrier versus a specific device like we talked about originally with the one Verizon SKU.
Actually, I want to follow up on that, because I think this whole question of fixed wireless access is sort of the first. It's been broadly assumed that this is the first 5G use case that is really going to emerge in the market. So I want to ask each of you. This is obviously an opportunity to avoid trenching fiber and the attendant costs with that. And also for different types of network operators, not just mobile network operators, to step outside of their franchise footprints. So how real is this opportunity? Which I think I probably have a little bit of perspective on this, because obviously we have AT&T, Verizon, they're doing it. And do you think it will catalyze greater enterprise adoption of whatever the wireless LAN opportunity ends up being there? Lindsay?
Sure. Actually, I had a very interesting conversation with an enterprise customer about a month ago. They run 4,000 or so dollar stores around the nation. And I learned something new about fixed wireless applications. They're not fixed. The IT director who I was talking to said, I am at the mercy of our merchandising department, because when they want to do a store refresh, my wiring closet gets moved. And so fixed isn't always fixed. No, not everybody's that way, but his desire was to have that freedom that I mentioned a little bit earlier. And I look at the operators and I think about those who are focusing on a particular, that they call franchise, their own footprint. Well, this is a whole opportunity for them to conquest new territory. And so I think this is going to be a real catalyst for growth in the enterprise. That's our view.
So it's freedom within the enterprise.
Freedom within.
Not necessarily, they don't need to go outside the building. They just need to be able to move around within it without having to move a bunch of wires.
Even with millimeter wave.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the point that's going to make that tip over the edge is the type of rate plans that the operators are going to have. You talked about not being able to drench fiber, but they're going to be having to do a bunch of fiber when we start millimeter wave, because
true.
they're going to have to put their own infrastructure in. Now, our cable companies have already done that. They've already come up with a hybrid fiber coax type environment, and so they're ahead of the game in that perspective in terms of getting to the consumer, but they're not necessarily built on servicing high speed to the enterprise. And so I think the various carriers and other people who actually can get spectrum or unlicensed spectrum, can be able to take over that last mile and have high speed as long as they have the fiber infrastructure.
I think it's, in the famous words of Yogi Berra, it's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. In this one, it's actually easy, okay? Because when you look at the evolution of LTE in the enterprise space, it became as a back channel, a redundancy piece, and it turned into the main channel. And, we can thank our hosts here and the free drinks tonight from Cradlepoint for paving the way here. So the work we've done together, in Cat 11 and Cat 18 and gigabit Ethernet shows that there's a voracious appetite in the enterprise space for more bandwidth, easier disconnect and connectivity. When 5G becomes, pervasive and able to deliver that, then I think, it's a clearly proven use case that will just, fly more and more, and it's much easier to deploy than rolling fiber or copper or any other solution out there in the field. So this one, I think, is a no-brainer.
Okay. All right. Well, and we will have an opportunity for you folks in the audience to ask some questions here. I do want to ask our panelists, though, what do you think is the biggest challenge for 5G at this point in its development? We are still pre-commercial deployment. We are still in the testing and trialing phase. There's still a lot of engineering going on to figure out how these things work and how they are going to work in deployed networks and in devices. So, Caroline,
let me start.
Okay,
with
yeah,
that.
Hasib, please.
I think the biggest challenge in putting all this together is the integration across all companies and across different devices, different standards, different interfaces, right? And if you throw in the orchestration and some of the open source component to it, then that becomes even furthermore, difficult for the whole community to move towards an unified solution, right? I mean, the example that I usually give that, whenever we're doing any kind of trial of 5G today, the UE device that we use, it looks like a mini refrigerator, right? And so all that has to go into your cell phone within a year and a half, or even later. I mean, or even a smaller time frame, right? So that's going to take a lot of coordination among all of us and more to pull this through, right? So I think that's, in my view, is the biggest challenge in getting this done.
Okay. Caroline?
So Caroline and I actually talked about this pre-drink. So I was just relaying to her is that we're really focusing on taking the cloud principle to the edge. Okay. If you look at what the cloud guys does really well, Amazon, Google, they have a wide variety of developers. Instantaneously, they turn something on, it's on. Versus for us, we're very specialized. I'm talking us as a generic telco sense. We have a very specialized go-to-market channel where our developers are this engineering grad. We really looked at if we truly want this thing to be adopted by enterprise. You think about all the application ecosystem, it's just very different. I was telling Kelly that Intel has something called Network Builder, targeting a traditional network ecosystem. A couple of weeks ago, we just launched Network Edge Builder because we recognize clearly that there is a different breed of folks you need to reach in order to make this happen. What Hasib talked about is, ONAP, Aquino, absolutely, that needs to be solved. And then if we truly wanted to be able to stand up like the cloud at the edge, that's what edge cloud is. Yeah. Behave like a cloud service provider. Take their cloud native approach and adapt that to the network. 4G and 5G, I don't care what it is. Until we do that, we will not have the ecosystem that today makes the cloud industry thriving. We got to take that step. We got to do that.
So I'd rephrase that a little bit. I'd say that we need to remove the complexity. It's just too complex. And I relate to what Hasib did because I think the danger is this overhyped scenario, right? We want to push 5G a lot, so we're talking about it. And this discussion around a killer app, it's not about a killer app. It's about making the access easy, pervasive, and simple. And if we can do that, then there's a bright future and a lot of money to be made on that on all sides. But we need to deliver, and that's the challenge.
Make it simple. Amen. Amen.
You create the ecosystem, and then amazing things happen. You know, I look at the kinds of applications that our customers are using wireless for. It's just amazing. I mean, I'm constantly amazed by the kind of new use cases that are developed. And if you think small, I would just rewind the clock 11 years. You know, we all had 3G phones 11 years ago, and then along came this little thing called the iPhone, and we just take for granted the millions of applications generating billions of dollars in revenue, and they're doing amazing things. And what happened? Did we create those? No. The ecosystem of developers created those things. We simply we're already seeing it today. That's why we call it this pathway to 5G, because already people are doing this. They just want more. They want more bandwidth. They want less latency, more responsiveness. That's what 5G is going to give them, and the rest will be magic. Make it simple, and they will come, so to speak.
Okay. Do we have any questions from our audience? Yeah.
Actually, it's a question to Karen. She was talking about Alibaba and the factory automation, Alibaba. You've probably seen Google recently have their presentation talk about Google Home making this AI call to schedule your appointment with a salon on your behalf. How much of AI do you think is going to go down to the edge, especially factory automation in Alibaba and things like that? So AI has a crucial role to play, and the 5G relation to that.
A lot. AI on the edge is absolutely key. Think about what you do today. You go on internet, all of a sudden you search something. I searched for red shoes. I bought a pair of red shoes, and now I'm inundated with red shoes. Somehow they figured that out. What if we do the recommendation on the edge, real time, in an arena, based on the behavior? I am a Longhorn fan, diehard. If they know that, they recommend all kinds. They have. But real time to me, recommending Connor Williams number 55 jersey. I just bought one. They recommend. I bought it. Think about that. Do it real time wirelessly over 5G. Look at the way that AT&T, Verizon can make money. Today it's being made 100% by Amazon. That's what I'm talking about. AI, machine learning, recommendation absolutely runs on the edge. Real time on the edge. Targeted audience.
And what I would like to see, actually, just as a consumer, is after I've purchased something, I don't want those ads to follow me for 3 days. Sell me something else. Sell me an accessory.
Because I already bought the red shoe.
Because I already bought it. And
exactly.
You're too late.
Don't tell me another red shoe. Sell me something else.
All right, question.
Hey guys, so I recently saw a talk about blockchain on the edge and using blockchain to solve the security problem to traverse different service providers and such, and just wanted to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Blockchain. Haseeb?
Yeah, so I mean, security at the edge or security for 5G is a very important topic, and it's going to be a very different things than what we have done in 4G. Because of the disaggregation of different, parts of the network, and also because of the way virtualization is going to work. So, for example, today your data center for the infrastructure and the data center for the application, or at least the computes for those, are very separated, segregated, marked on the hardware level of demarcation. But when you go in the edge, if you have applications that are onboarding from third parties, whether it's a telco or web scale, and then you have the infrastructure, and especially with a limited footprint, you're not going to be able to have that level of luxury to demark in the hardware, and you have to be able to have very secure, isolated workspace for all of those different entities and tenants. So those will be key aspects that needs to be addressed. So blockchain is of course one of the way that can be done, and blockchain also comes into another areas that when you have all of this remote type of services using drones and even like the delivery at your home and so forth, then you need to know which garage is yours and which camera is yours or which device is this enterprise, and all of those needs to be very securely manipulated and validated on real time and different spaces on different dimensions. So blockchain has been looked into from that aspect, and there has been a good validation that this is one of the area or one of the technology that can advance these capabilities and satisfy these requirements.
Yeah, I would also add, at the end of the day, it's got to be software related. I mean, our legacy architecture of a centralized VPN concentrator and tromboning traffic all over the place when the destination's in the cloud, that just isn't going to work, especially when the requirement is a millisecond in end-to-end round trip. So it clearly has to be in software. We've made some investments in software-defined perimeter technologies. So whether it's blockchain, whether it's SDP, the answer is software. I think comes back to Caroline's point.
Absolutely. SDN and NFV, software sells.
Yeah,
Over here.
So I have a question relative to, I'm not sure who brought up the point about ecosystem, and I know the exact dates of when the iPhone 3G came out, and it wasn't until about 13 or actually about 15 months later until Apple had the OS moment and goes, God, we better catch up and make and create a store for this. And everything in that case was all driven, the ecosystem was all driven around the device. Everything we hear here is all about the network. What makes you think that the network is what's going to drive the ecosystem?
Yeah,
Man, I wish we had the guy from AT&T here because he was all about that question. Anyhow, all right.
Yeah, so I don't believe that it's going to be solely based on network. I think it can be solely based on device too. We don't really know. But the thing is that network is going to play a role in it, because one of the things that's going to happen in the network is as you reach to the users, you have to reach through the edge of your networks. And the real estate of the edge is actually with the folks that owns that network, right? So that will play a key role in it, whichever way the ecosystem plays out. But the device always wins. I mean, the device always has a very key role in it because that's the most intimate, piece that the customer has and customer gets to interact. So the device will always have, a lot of say in it. So I think it's going to be a shared things, but you cannot discount network out if you are, talking about, like let's say talking about deploying this into 60,000 cell sites of an operator, right?
But 60,000 cell sites is dwarfed by, 5 billion, mobile devices today going to 50 billion IoT devices.
Absolutely, but I think there's also the point that you didn't see the iPhone emerge until we started to get 3G.
That's correct. 3GS, yeah.
So, I mean, the network came before the device could come.
And I think the other point is that when you think of device, you think of iPhone. But in reality, most of the devices is going to be coming from this. It's going to be in a machine. It's going to be in a plane. It's going to be a washer. It's not... I would say network definitely has a probably even more important role than before. Not to discount device, but the device in the future, majority of it's not going to be this. The majority of it's going to be something embedded into. I mean, that's where your point is alone.
So
But that makes it harder if you talk about embedded. Embedded makes it much harder because now you have a disparate range of devices.
Correct.
From washing machines
Correct.
to utility meters to whatever.
Yeah.
So
How do you pull that together?
And I think that's one of the big
That's what the
challenges.
network, yeah.
So maybe that ties to your previous question over here, because we've been talking about this interconnected world, and what does that mean? I mean, take a car. classic edge device these days. There are 150 different compute systems in there. There are sensors in there. The latest one I saw was a terahertz radar, basically, that can monitor your skin just to see that there's someone actually present in the car, even if it's a hands-off scenario, and that you're awake, which is another scenario, because in the level 4 scenario, you have to be able to wake up someone to take over control. If you're sleeping and there's a 2-second interval, I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I'm there in 2 seconds. So all these interconnects need to happen. And yeah, 5G is a great backbone and the latency and the rest, but you're talking about lots and lots of other technologies that are centered around a device or a gateway or an edge device that has to be able to talk to all of them in a consistent manner and in a secure manner as well. So blockchain is a great technology, another one that is, lots of marketing value around and beyond. But think about this. How do you have two different devices from different manufacturers, different technologies, communicate with one another? You need a secure ledger somewhere for these, obscure devices to talk to. Again, from the automotive industry, there's a lot of talk around EV refueling. So you're on a drive and you want to go, you don't need a gas station anymore, right? But you're looking for someone with a pole somewhere. So how do you find that pole and pay for it? So all these things need to come together. The network is the carrier for it, the enabler, but it's not the end-all, be-all answer.
And we are at a carrier show.
All right, any other audience? When is 5G going to happen? Let's. You know what? I'm going to come back to that one because you've been waiting very patiently, and I want to get to your question. We'll make that our last one.
So, question for the panel. Clearly, 5G technology will have an impact on revenue stream for the carriers, for the manufacturer, for the device manufacturer, for the telecom equipment manufacturer. If you draw a picture for me in 5 years from now, what revenues will go away and what new revenues will come for the device manufacturer, for the telecom manufacturer, for the carrier?
Ooh.
What do you think will happen there? What kind of disruption will happen on these revenues streams?
I'm going to guess that software revenues are going to continue to grow.
For who?
All. I would say all.
I think everybody, yeah, hopefully
but they
all.
may not be in the way that you think.
Yeah.
So the edge of the network, staying on the network operator side, is a huge revenue opportunity because that's where that mini cloud will be. There will be the cloud that we know today, but that is too far away from a latency perspective. So there's a whole new set of revenues that operators have. But I think you're going to see probably more of the traditional revenues will probably go away. Overages, I hope, go away. But that doesn't mean that revenues will go away. Just they're going to be different.
Yeah, I think there'll be a new business model. We saw that recently. Well, last year we did a trial and then now going to deployment in China that involved the cloud service provider, the operator, and TEMS. We provide the backbone technology, but we clearly saw the revenue share potential between the cloud guys and the content provider who happen to own the content and the stadium owners and the operator. So much so that the cloud guys actually took investment into the operators. That happened in China. All three of them took investment in China Unicom. So I think there is a new business model emerging that hard to predict, but you're right. I think software will continue to be the king. I think NFV SDN will absolutely be maturing and be the core backbone of what makes 5G. But we got to watch out. I'm speaking as a people being a telco forever. There is a race between the clouds, and then gravity is with them because they got all that developers. If we don't be careful, we don't want to be another pipe. Right? A pipe makes good business, but we can make more business if we take advantage of monetizing what we got. Everybody sits here will benefit from it, but the gravity is absolutely with the cloud.
And I think the applications are going to be moving from being the old mainframe type of what we think of the cloud today into something that's a little bit closer to the user. And so there's a definite need for the operators or somebody else to be able to take that cloud and expand it all the way as close to the user as they can get it. It's for multiple hops, as you we were saying. So either at the radio or at the CEO or at the data center, we need to have that, and the Amazons aren't going to sit still and say, oh, we're just going to give them that. They're going to have to bring their business closer to the edge as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is again, don't have a crystal ball, but the thing that works is the usability and simplicity, right? So if all of the things that we're offering, or the operators would be offering from the network perspective, if those are not usable and simple, then the ecosystem around that, or the critical mass around that would not have happened, right? And that's the thing that needs to happen to make this, I guess, more realizable. One of the things that I wanted to give an example, that there is now on vehicle, all you can eat type of bandwidth that you can buy from operators today. So it's a very new thing. Like, as long as you're inside that vehicle, you can see all kind of contents, and you pay price for that. So that's a new area that operators are getting from the users, in addition to your mobile broadband. So it's kind of general consensus that mobile broadband is not, it's not going to be, I guess, give the return of the 5G investment only, right? That's one piece of it, but there has to be other innovation that needs to happen around that areas.
Okay.
Quick follow-up, if I may. Just quick follow-up. Do you think the mobile edge computing will take away money or revenue from Apple and Google? Now you're going to move things away from the device to the edge of the network. Is that going to are we going to compete with them?
I think it depends on what the complexity of the application is. So you can only go so much with a handheld device until you start having, a big, large Intel-based processor for your handheld. It's just not going to happen because we don't have the battery power or anything like that. So you have to be able to put that infrastructure and part of that application somewhere in the network. And you want it as we get to the low latency, we want to have it as close to the user as possible.
So I would not say that take away the business. I would say that there would be a place for the network to offer something on the table that will have some sort of revenue sharing or some sort of collaboration with the other entities that was not there before.
We're at 100% penetration. I mean, everybody on the phone has 2 or 3 mobile phones with them. So the uses we're talking about for a lot of this stuff is not another consumer device. You're talking manufacturing floor. I can take you to plants where we automotive industry and things. You'd be amazed at the amount of automation that's going on there. And it's truly federated. It's Wi-Fi and RFID and Bluetooth and 20 other different short-range technologies and cellular for a variety of different things. So the applications, the need, the demand for this, the money is coming from the customer, the enterprise, the business, the consumer, the end user. They're going to focus on the stuff that brings them value, the rest is the infrastructure to drive it for them. So we're not talking about replacing phones. That's already, an existing fully
realized use case. Yeah.
Good point.
Very saturated.
Okay, so I'm going to get to that last question, and that is, when is 5G going to happen? And we're going to end on this note. If you folks have other questions, I encourage you to ask our panelists afterwards. Please enjoy the music that's coming, the food, the drink. But for now, panelists, Hasib, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to work my way down the row. When are we going to see 5G happening?
Yeah, so the trials, as you know, that have been announced on the millimeter wave have been going on with several operators in the U.S., also in overseas as well. So we believe that we're going to see a production-grade deployment, by the end of 2018 in limited scope. And I guess the key caveat to it, again, to our friends on the device sides, right? The devices have to be available. I mean, I don't see my refrigerator being a viable, usable, commodity that will be used today, right? So that's where I think is one of the long pole that we have to see. And we expect the tablet form factor to come in the in the early time frame before the mobile or the more smaller devices come. So I think that, first half of 2019, we'll see some very good usage of production quality in pockets of the network for very specific use cases. And then I think the general adoption is going to start either end of 19 or early 2020 type of time.
Roger, thoughts on?
I wholly agree with that because the chipsets aren't available yet for us to productize something there. We definitely will see stuff coming out with pathway to 5G here in 2018 with millimeter wave, and once we get into new radio in 2019, we're probably looking at the late 2019s for us to have sort of a productization type thing based on chipset availability.
Alon, any insider information you can?
So I shared my Yogi Berra line. I'll stick with it's deja vu all over again. This is a new technology rollout. There's stages in this. We know where we start. It's a process. I will say that I think it is happening. There's no longer a question or a debate. We need to close some of the standardization issues, availability of chipsets. We'll also define when this will hit quality. But the train has left the station, and we're on the path. So we'll get there.
Caroline?
Well, my bet is 2020 in the Summer Olympics timeframe, you're going to see some mobility. And then 2022, China, they don't do anything small. You're going to see a lot of enterprises. And then by then, we can have the same conversation somewhere in Hawaii, on the beach, with the music, drinking coconut.
Hopefully the volcano will have calmed down by then.
They'll come down by then. Yeah. It'll be wonderful to have that conversation and make the prediction.
Lindsay?
Yeah, and I'd say, all of us are involved in a number of these carrier trials. So, we can't tell you what we know, but I will reiterate public statements that I think you'll see it launch in 2018, second half. I think you'll see it's a race. In fact, I saw an article today at one of the Ooredoo had announced the availability of the first 5G network as of right now. They don't have any devices. Okay. Whoops, that's a little bit of an issue, but pay no attention to that. I think you'll see launches this year, either somewhere in Asia or the US. I think you'll see the rest of the timetable as far as mobility and broad device availability and broad network availability. Say that 5 times. And I haven't had one of those 5 gin and tonics yet. Sometime in 2019 and large mobility in 2020.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors. And we really appreciate all of you being here. Please take this opportunity to draw on some of the wisdom of the folks who are up here. Ask them questions. Hopefully they can share even more insights with you. And thank you all for joining us tonight.